Clara Whitcomb stood in the snow outside the burned livery with a dead man's wedding ring sewn inside her hem, while the town marshal asked whether she had come west to marry or to steal. Her mail-order groom had never met her at the train. Her trunk had gone missing, and the only proof she had of being wanted was that small gold circle pressing cold against her ankle. Then Caleb Rusk, a cowboy with blood soaking through his sleeve and pride keeping him upright, stumbled from his horse and looked at her as if she were not trash left beside the depot, but the one person who might keep him alive. The crowd laughed when she reached for him. The ring stayed hidden. Her hands did not. Before we begin, leave your country name below and tell me where this western night is reaching you. Subscribe if stories of rejected brides, protective cowboys, and hard-earned love keep you listening. The train had left Pine Hollow behind with a long, mournful whistle, dragging the last of its smoke into a sky the color of old pewter. Clara Whitcomb did not wave after it. There was no one aboard who knew her name, and no one on the platform willing to learn it. She stood with her carpetbag hugged tight to her ribs, her boot wet through at the seams, and the wind lifting loose strands of brown hair from beneath her bonnet. Snow came down thin and sharp, not soft like the Christmas cards back east, but sideways like frozen salt. It clung to the blackened beams of the livery stable across the street, where only yesterday, according to the station boy, a lantern had tipped in the hay and burned 2 stalls, 3 horses, and one man's hopes of leaving town before winter closed the pass. Clara had arrived one day too late and unwanted by everyone who mattered. Her promised husband, Mr. Silas Boone, had written 6 letters in a slanted hand, each one speaking of a ranch house, a proper stove, and a woman needed before the first killing frost. He had sent a silver ticket and a plain gold wedding ring, saying he would meet her wearing a gray hat with a turkey feather in the band. The ring had come wrapped in linen, not grand, not heavy, but honest. Clara had touched it every night on the train, telling herself that a ring meant a place at someone's table. A ring meant she would not have to scrub boarding house floors until her knuckles bled. A ring meant that after being passed over in Boston, pitied in St. Louis, and dismissed by her own aunt as too plain to choose, she might still be chosen. But when Clara stepped off the train, no man in a gray hat waited. The station master looked over his spectacles and said, Silas Boone had gone south 3 days ago with a widow from Abilene. He sold his place? Clara asked. Lost it, the man said. Cards, cattle, and bad judgment, not always in that order. A few men near the freight scale laughed. One of them spat tobacco into the snow. Clara's cheeks burned. There must be some mistake. The station master's wife, a thin woman with a shawl clutched at her throat, gave Clara a look that held more curiosity than kindness. Honey, out here, a mistake can still freeze to death. That was when the marshal came. Jeb Crowder was built wide and slow, with a mustache that curled down at the ends and eyes that liked an audience. He stopped in front of Clara as if she were a sack of flour delivered to the wrong store. Name? Clara Whitcomb. Business? He swallowed. I came to marry Mr. Silas Boone. More laughter, louder now. Someone muttered. Another one. Crowder's eyes dropped to her worn gloves, her patched coat, and the carpetbag that held one spare dress, a Bible, a sewing kit, and 3 coins wrapped in paper. Boone ain't here. Your trunk ain't here. Your intended ain't here. Folks might wonder what is here. I have letters. Anybody can carry letters. Clara reached for the pocket inside her bodice where the letters lay folded. Before her fingers found them, a wagon rolled by and splashed icy mud over her skirt. The crowd laughed again, because shame in a small town was a kind of show, and Clara had become the stage. Then a horse came hard down the north road. It was a bay gelding, foam at its chest, reins swinging loose. The rider bent low in the saddle, one hand pressed tight to his left side. His hat was gone, and his dark hair was wet with snow. He made it halfway to the hitching rail before his horse shied from the burned livery and stopped sharp. The man slid sideways. Clara moved before she thought. She dropped her carpet bag and crossed the street through the mud, catching his arm just as his boot struck the ground. He was taller than she expected, all bone and muscle beneath a long coat stiff with frost. Blood had soaked through the cloth near his ribs and down his sleeve. "Sir," she said, "you're hurt." His eyes opened. They were gray, clear even through pain and wary enough to cut. "Don't fuss, you're bleeding. Not enough to die over. That is not for you to decide." The words came out sharper than she intended. The crowd had followed, boots scraping over frozen mud. Marshal Crowder folded his arms. "That's Caleb Rust," someone said. "Rust don't need help from a lost bride." The wounded man heard it. His jaw tightened. Clara pressed her gloved hand against the wet tear in his coat. Warm blood pushed between her fingers. The smell of iron rose over the smell of smoke and snow. Caleb Rust looked at her then. Truly looked. "You know how to bind a wound. My father was a surgeon's assistant before he died. I learned enough. Enough and much." "No," she said. "But it is more than the men standing around watching you bleed." A silence fell. It was brief, brittle, and dangerous. Caleb almost smiled, then winced. "Marshal, quit staring and fetch Doc Bell Dodo see at Miller Creek," Crowder said. "Want me back before dark?" Clara's fingers tightened. "Saying, I need clean cloth, hot water, whiskey if you have it, and somewhere out of this street." Nobody moved. Caleb's gaze drifted to her muddy hem, to the carpet bag lying in the slush, and finally back to her face. "You got somewhere to go?" The question broke something inside her, not loudly, just enough that she felt the crack. "No," Clara said. He took a slow breath, and pain whitened his mouth. "Then, I suppose we're both short on options." The town did not like that answer. A woman by the mercantile door whispered behind her hand. Two boys laughed until Caleb turned his head, and they stopped. Marshal Crowder rocked on his heels, watching Clara with open suspicion. Caleb pushed himself away from her support, proud even while swaying. "Mrs. Pritchard has rooms above the laundry." Mrs. Pritchard, the station master's wife, shook her head before the sentence finished. "Not for strangers without money." Clara stiffened. Caleb looked at the woman. "Put it on my account. You already owe for feed." "I said put it on my account." His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a man accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. Even if his coat was torn and blood was dripping from his fingertips, Mrs. Pritchard's mouth pinched. "Fine, one night. Attic room." Clara should have thanked him. Instead, she said, "You need a bed before I do. I got a bunk at the ranch. You will not reach it with that wound untended." His eyes narrowed. He did not like being told what he could not do. Clara recognized the look. Men wore it when pain frightened them, and pride had nowhere else to stand. Caleb glanced toward the north road, toward whatever trouble had followed him. "I just stay in town. Thin bleed in the saddle, if you choose." A man chuckled under his breath. Caleb looked at Clara again, and something changed there. Not softness, not trust, but perhaps a grudging notice that she had not stepped back from blood, insult, or weather. "Fine," he said. "You bind it. Then I ride. You will sit." I said ride, and I said sit. For the first time since Clara had stepped off the train, nobody laughed. They took him into the back room of the mercantile, because it had a stove and a table long enough for a man. Mr. Dobbins, the storekeeper, complained about blood on the floor, until Caleb asked whether he preferred blood outside his door with the whole town watching. Dobbins fetched water without another word. Clara washed her hands in a basin with brown soap while Caleb sat stiffly on a chair, refusing to lie down. His shirt had to be cut away from the wound. She apologized before slicing the fabric. "Don't mourn the shirt," he said through clenched teeth. "It had a poor opinion of winter anyhow." She did not smile, though the small attempt at humor steadied her. The wound was ugly, but not deep enough to be certain death. A bullet had grazed below his ribs and torn through flesh along his side. Another cut marked his upper arm, jagged as if from a fall against rock or broken wood. "This was not a riding accident," she said. "No, was someone shooting at you?" Likely. I didn't stop to ask his purpose." She pressed a cloth soaked with whiskey to the wound. He sucked air through his teeth, but did not curse. "Hold still. I am. You are trying to leave this chair with your bones." His gaze cut to her, annoyed and almost amused. "You talk this way to all wounded men. Only the foolish ones." His mouth tightened again, but not from anger, from pain. Clara worked quickly, her fingers remembering what grief had tried to bury. Her father had died when she was 16, after fever took the strength from his hands. Before that, she had carried basins, boiled instruments, sewn linen strips, and learned that blood frightened most people because it made every soul look equal. When the wound was cleaned and bound, Caleb's face had gone gray beneath his weathered skin. "You need rest," Clara said. "I need to reach my ranch. You need not to tear open what I just closed." He braced a hand on the table. "There's a boy at my place. A son." "No." The answer came too fast, too cold. "Hired woman's nephew, 8 years old. Name's Toby. His aunt passed in September. He stayed, and he is alone." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. "He knows how to keep the stove lit. He is 8. He's been 8 in Wyoming since June. That counts as 12 most places." Clara stared at him. Caleb rubbed a hand over his eyes. "I left before dawn to buy flour. Got trouble instead." "What trouble?" He looked toward the room's closed door. Voices murmured beyond it. The town was waiting for the next piece of shame to chew. "Rancher named Wade Harlan wants my land. Says the creek rights belong to him. I say they don't. Men with rifles tried to persuade me different." "Then you must tell the marshal." Caleb gave a short laugh, empty of humor. "Crowder eats beef at Harlan's table every Sunday." Clara glanced down at the bandage. Blood had already begun to stain through, but slowly. "You cannot ride alone." "Soon I can ride better alone than with a woman who got off the wrong train." The words struck clean. Caleb seemed to know it the moment they left him. His face hardened, not because he felt no remorse, but because feeling it would cost him something. Clara stepped back. "Your bandage will hold until the doctor returns. Try not to die before then." She turned away, gathered the bloody cloths, and kept her face calm. She had spent years learning not to show when a room had wounded her. Plain women learned that early. Poor women learned it twice. Behind her, Caleb said, "Miss Whitcomb." She did not answer. "I said that poorly." "Yes, I meant you don't know the country. The road's bad. Harlan's men might still be near. Then say that next time." He was quiet. She washed the cloths in cold water because hot water had gone scarce. As she wrung them, something hard pressed against her ankle beneath her muddy skirt. The ring, Silas Boone's ring. The ring she had sewn into her hem after a woman on the train warned that desperate girls were easy prey west of Kansas City. Clara had thought she would remove it in Pine Hollow and let her groom place it on her finger. Instead, it hid against her leg like a secret she was ashamed to own. She could sell it. She knew that. A plain gold ring could buy meals, a ticket east, perhaps a room for a week. But selling it felt like admitting she had never been chosen at all. By late afternoon, the storm thickened. Doc Bell did not return. Caleb tried to stand 3 times, and 3 times Clara's look alone forced him back into the chair. At dusk, a small boy burst into the mercantile with snow in his lashes and terror right in his face. "Mr. Russ!" Caleb stood too fast and nearly fell. Clara caught the back of the chair, not him, because she suspected his pride would accept furniture before hands. "Toby," Caleb said, What are you doing in town? The roof smoking. Caleb's face went still. The boy gulped air. Not the house. The old shed by the east pen. I put water but the wind. Caleb grabbed his coat. Clara stepped in front of him. No, move. You cannot ride. My ranch is burning. Your wound is open. My ranch is burning, he said again. And this time his voice broke just enough to reveal the fear underneath. Clara looked at Toby. The boy was shivering so hard his teeth clicked. No one in the mercantile moved. Not Dobbins, not Mrs. Pritchard, not Marshall Crowder, who had wandered in to warm himself by the stove. Clara reached for her carpetbag. Caleb stared. What are you doing? Coming with you. I didn't ask. No, she said, tying her bonnet under her chin. You insulted me instead, but the boy came for help, and I know how to keep a man from bleeding through a saddle. Toby looked between them, uncertain. Marshall Crowder snorted. A mail-order bride riding into a winter fire. That'll make a fine story. Clara turned to him. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. Only if the men stay behind to tell it. The room went silent again. Caleb looked at her with something like surprise, then something deeper that he hid quickly. Dobbins, hitch your wagon. No team for that road in this weather. Caleb reached for his holster, not drawing, only resting his hand there. I didn't ask about weather. Dobbins hitched the wagon. The ride to Rusk Creek took nearly 2 hours through snow that erased the road and made the world smaller than the lantern swinging from the wagon bow. Caleb sat beside Dobbins, jaw clenched, one hand pressed against his side. Clara sat in the back with Toby under a quilt, holding the boy close, though she had known him less than an hour. He smelled of smoke, wool, and little boy fear. Did I do bad? Toby whispered. No, Clara said. You did brave. Brave and scared often ride the same horse. My aunt said Mr. Rusk don't like noise. Those he like biscuits. Toby blinked. I guess. Then we shall begin there. Men who do not like noise can still be improved with biscuits. A small smile twitched at the boy's mouth. When they reached the ranch, the shed had burned low, but not spread to the house. 2 horses milled in the snow near the east pen, nervous but alive. Caleb tried to jump down before the wagon stopped. Clara grabbed his sleeve. You will wait. This is my place, and it will remain your place for the 10 seconds it takes you not to split your side open. He glared. Then he waited. The Rusk house sat low against the wind, built of squared logs and stubbornness. One window glowed. Smoke rose from the chimney. Beside it stood the charred skeleton of a shed, still hissing where snow struck embers. The smell pulled something from Caleb's face, something raw and old. Clara saw it before he turned away. This was not the first thing he had watched burn. Inside, the house was cold near the floor and warm near the stove. It held a table, 3 chairs, a shelf of chipped dishes, a rifle over the door, and a corner curtained off with a quilt where Toby must sleep. There were no woman's touches except old ones. A faded blue curtain, a cracked jar of dried lavender, a shawl hanging on a peg too high for a child. Caleb dropped into a chair and shut his eyes. Clara untied her bonnet. Where is your flour? Didn't get any. Coffee. Some. Beans. Toby. The boy looked guilty. Some. Clara set her carpetbag on the table. Then tonight, we make some into enough. Caleb opened one eye. You always take command of houses you don't own. Only when the owner is bleeding on the chair and the child is hungry. He had no answer for that. She found beans, cornmeal, half an onion, coffee, and a crock of lard. The kitchen was poorly kept, but not filthy, more neglected than dirty, as if the house had been waiting for someone to remember it, had had a heart. Clara moved through it quietly, not as mistress, not as guest, but as a woman who knew hunger did not care about pride. While the beans warmed, she checked Caleb's bandage. He hissed when she touched the edge. Torn, she said, barely. Do you argue with fences when they break too? Fences listen better, she almost smiled. The bleeding was not dangerous yet, but the ride had cost him. She cleaned the wound again while Toby ate at the table, pretending not to watch. Caleb kept his gaze fixed on the stove. "You have done this often," he said. "My father taught me. A doctor, almost. He was assistant to one, then helped where he could. Poor people rarely get the whole doctor." Caleb looked at her hands. "And your mother?" "Gone when I was small." "Husband." The word landed between them like a drop pan. Clara wrapped the bandage with care. "I came for one. That ain't what I asked." "No," she said, "but it is all I care to answer tonight." Caleb nodded once, accepting the boundary as if it were a fence line. After supper, Toby fell asleep with his head on folded arms. Caleb reached to lift him, but Clara stopped him with a look and carried the boy herself. He was heavier than he seemed, all long limbs and sleep. She tucked him behind the quilt curtain and set his boots by the stove to dry. When she returned, Caleb was watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Nothing. Men who say nothing usually mean too much." He looked away. "You can take the bed." "No, I won't argue." "You will if breathing continues." "The bed belonged to my wife." Clara's answer faded. Caleb stared at the stove. The firelight cut lines into his face, showing more weariness than age. "She died 2 winters ago. Fever after childbirth. Baby went before dawn. She went by dusk. Bed's been empty since." "I'm sorry," Clara said. He nodded as if the words struck but did not enter. "I don't sleep in it." That explained the house, the cold corners, the lavender. The shawl kept on a peg but never touched. Clara's voice softened. I will not sleep in it either." His jaw worked. "You don't have to carry my ghosts, no, but I need not step on them." For a moment, the only sound was the wind pushing snow against the walls. Caleb cleared his throat. "There's a cot in the pantry. I have slept worse places." "I expect you have." He meant it gently, but it still hurt because it was true. That night, Clara lay on the narrow cot with her coat over her blanket and listened to the house breathe. Toby muttered in his sleep. Caleb shifted in the front room, awake more often than not. The storm pressed against the roof like a hand. At her ankle, the hidden ring, warm beneath the quilt. She touched the hem through the blanket. She had not sold it at the station. She had not sold it at the mercantile. She had carried it into a stranger's house, past blood, insult, and fire. It was foolish, perhaps, but in a world that had stripped her of everything else, the ring was proof that once, even falsely, someone had written, "Come west, I need you." In the morning, Caleb's fever came. It was not high enough to steal his senses, but enough to make him stubborn in new and exhausting ways. He tried to go to the barn before sunrise and got as far as the door before Clara blocked him with a skillet in one hand. "I need to check the horses," he said. "Toby checked them. Toby is 8, according to you, 12 in Wyoming." That was yesterday. Convenient aging. He leaned one hand against the doorframe. "Miss Whitcomb, Mr. Russ." They stared at each other until his strength failed first. He hated that. She could see it cut him deeper than the bullet. "I don't take well to being helpless," he said. "Nobody does." "I take worse than most." I noticed. His mouth twitched. "You got a cure for that. Work time, and not frightening children by collapsing in doorways." He looked down, chastened despite himself. Fair. It was the first easy word he had given her. The next 3 days drew them into a strange rhythm. Clara cooked with whatever the pantry offered. Toby brought in wood, fed chickens, and reported ranch matters as if he were foreman of a kingdom. Caleb sat by the table with a ledger open, pretending to manage accounts while Clara knew very well he was watching her mend the torn sleeve of his coat. The ranch was poorer than Pine Hollow believed. That surprised her. Folks in town spoke of Rust Creek as if Caleb sat on a gold mine of cattle, and creek water. But the ledger showed debt in careful columns: feed bills, medical bills, a mortgage note held by the bank, repairs undone, cattle lost to early snow. "You shouldn't look at another man's accounts," Caleb said one afternoon. "You left the ledger open beside the bread dough." "That ain't permission." "No," she said. "It is carelessness." He shut the book. "You always this honest?" "When I can afford it." He studied her then. "And when you can't?" She threaded her needle. "Then I stay quiet." The words settled between them. Caleb did not ask about the ring. He did not know it existed. But Clara caught him once looking at her hem where a small weight pulled the fabric wrong. She shifted her skirt and felt foolishly exposed. On the fourth day, Doc Bell arrived in a sleigh with a buffalo robe over his knees and a beer full of ice. He inspected Caleb's wound, complimented Clara's bandage, and said the cowboy would live if he obeyed orders for once in his mule-headed life. Caleb grunted. "Doctors speak too much." Doc Bell smiled at Clara. "And good nurses speak just enough. You looking for work?" Clara glanced at Caleb. "I was looking for a husband." The doctor's smile faded kindly. "Pine Hollow is short on many things, Miss Whitcomb. Sense is one of them." He left quinine, salve, and a warning about infection. He also left news. Wade Harlan had told town that Caleb started his own shed fire to collect sympathy before refusing a lawful creek settlement. Marshall Crowder had repeated the tale. At church, Mrs. Harlan had prayed aloud for women drifting west under false pretenses. Clara knew who that meant. Toby's fists balled. "They're lying." Caleb's face turned cold enough to rival the window frost. "Harlan can lie himself warm. I ain't going to church for a sermon dressed up as gossip." Clara folded the clean bandage cloth. "Sometimes silence gives lies a chair at the table." He looked at her. "You volunteering to face them?" "I have faced them already." "You don't know what Harlan is." "I know what he does." "That is often enough." Caleb shut the ledger again, harder than necessary. No. I won." "Have you dragged into my fight?" "I was dragged into it when your town decided I was either pitiful or wicked." His expression flickered. "This town is not mine. And it's the one nearest your door that struck." He rose slower now and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the land remained white and hard. The creek line showed dark through cottonwoods beyond the barn. "My wife loved church," he said suddenly. "Played hymns badly, sang them worse. Everyone loved her for it." Clara stayed still. "After she died, Mrs. Harlan brought a pie and told me grief can sour a man if he does not put it to service. She said I should sell the ranch and move closer to people who could guide me." "Guide your grief or your land deed?" He gave a dry, bitter sound. "You see quick. I have had practice with people who call hunger laziness and loneliness sin." He turned from the window. "Who did that to you?" The question was too gentle. She preferred his sharpness. Sharpness could be parried. "My aunt took me in after father died. She had 3 daughters, all pretty, all married. I sewed their dresses, trimmed their hats, read their letters aloud when they wished to laugh at spelling. When Mr. Boone's advertisement came, my aunt said even a plain woman might suit a desperate man in cattle country." Caleb's hand tightened on the windowsill. Clara wished she had stopped sooner. But something about the warm kitchen, the boy listening with wide eyes, and the wounded cowboy's silence loosened her tongue. Silas Boone wrote kindly. "I believed kindness on paper. That was my mistake. That was his wrong," Caleb said. She looked up. He seemed uncomfortable with his own certainty, but he did not take it back. "Believing ain't a crime." "No," she said, "but it can be expensive." Over the next week, Clara became less a guest and more a question nobody knew how to answer. She kept house, but not like a servant. She tended Caleb's wound, but not like a nurse hired with wages. She helped Toby with his letters, but not like a mother, though the boy began saving the largest biscuit for her and asking whether Boston had coyotes. Caleb paid her in restraint at first. He did not order her, did not pry, did not call her by the names town had placed on her. But he also did not ask her to stay beyond the storm, and the absence of asking grew heavier each night. Practical mercy built the first bridge between them. He noticed when she gave Toby the last egg and said she was not hungry. The next morning, he limped to the smokehouse and returned with bacon, hidden under a cloth, pretending he had gone for a hammer. She noticed when his hands shook after nightmares, and she put coffee near him without speaking. He noticed when she patched his wife's blue curtain without removing the faded ribbon tied to one corner. She noticed he could not look at the empty bed, but every Friday he cleaned the room and replaced the lavender jar. One evening, Toby came in crying with a split lip. A ranch hand from Harlan's place had ridden by and called Clara a trained bride nobody bought. Toby had thrown a rock. The ranch hand had slapped him. Caleb reached for his gun belt. Clara stepped between him and the peg. No, his eyes were dangerous. He hit a child, and you are not healed enough to survive your anger. He hit Toby. I hurt? Then move. She did not teach him a better answer. Caleb's breathing was hard. Toby stood by the stove, trying not to cry harder. For a moment, Clara thought Caleb would push past her. Instead, he looked at the boy. The fury in his face did not vanish, but it changed direction. Come here, Caleb said. Toby obeyed. Caleb crouched with effort, pain tightening his mouth. A man who strikes a child is already smaller than you. Don't make yourself smaller chasing him. Toby wiped his nose, but he said Miss Clara was. I know what he said. It ain't true. No, Caleb said, and looked up at Clara. It ain't. Those 3 words warmed her more than the stove. The first time Clara returned to town, she went for flour, thread, and quinine. Caleb insisted on driving the wagon. You can barely hold the reins, she said. I can hold them better than I can sit here, imagining Crowder breathing near you. That is not a Christian sentiment. I ain't claimed sainthood. He was pale by the time they reached Pine Hollow, but he kept his hat low and his gaze forward. Clara sat beside him, hands folded over her carpet bag, feeling the ring in her hem with every jolt of the wagon. The town saw them before the team stopped. Towns always did. Mrs. Pritchard paused with laundry in her arms. Dobbins looked over the mercantile counter. Marshal Crowder emerged from his office chewing slowly on a toothpick. Well now, Crowder said, the lost bride returns with a keeper. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. Clara touched his sleeve. A small touch, a reminder. Not helpless, not silent, not alone. I came for supplies, she said. Crowder grinned. On rust credit, on money earned. She had mended shirts for 2 ranch hands, stitched a saddle blanket, and taken in wash from Doc Bell's wife. The coins in her purse were few but hers. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Harlan stood by the canned peaches in a cloak trimmed with fox fur. She was handsome, polished and cold in the way silver is cold. Her eyes ran over Clara's plain coat. My dear, she said, loud enough for the store to hear, you must be careful. Men in grief sometimes take in strays for comfort and regret the charity by spring. Clara felt the room waiting for her to shrink. Caleb stepped forward, but she spoke first. Mrs. Harlan, I have been poor enough to know the difference between charity and work. Have you? Dobbins dropped a scoop. Mrs. Harlan's smile tightened. Boldness does not become every woman. Neither does cruelty. The store went so quiet Clara heard the stove bottle. Caleb looked at her with something like pride, and that was dangerous. Pride could feel too close to affection when a woman had been starved for both. Mrs. Harlan turned to Caleb. Wade wishes to speak with you about the creek. Privately. My answer is public, Caleb said. No, You are in debt. So is half this county. You are injured, not dead. You are alone. At that, his face changed. Clara saw the arrow land. Mrs. Holland did too. Caleb's voice dropped. Not as much as I was. The words reached Clara slowly. Not a confession, not a promise, but they stayed with her all the way home. 2 nights later, Caleb found the ring. Not by searching. Clara would have forgiven searching less. It happened because she slipped on ice by the barn and tore the hem of her skirt on a nail. The small gold ring fell into the snow and landed beside Caleb's boot. For one long second, neither of them moved. Then he bent stiffly and picked it up. The ring looked smaller in his rough palm. Clara felt heat rise from her throat to her hairline. Give it back. He did at once. No teasing, no accusation. That mercy almost undid her. I did not steal it, she said. I didn't say you did. He sent it, Mr. Boone, in a letter. I sewed it there so no one on the train would take it. Caleb's eyes held hers. Why didn't you sell it? Because it was proof. Because it was shame. Because it was the only thing she owned that had once pretended to mean future. She closed her fist around it. I don't know. Yes, you do. The gentleness in his voice made her angry. You think me foolish. I think that ring cost you more than gold. She turned away. It was meant for a woman someone wanted. Behind her, his boots shifted in the snow. Clara. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She could not look back. I was wanted once, he said. By my wife, by a child who never drew breath long enough to know better. After they died, I kept her shawl on the peg in the room. As it was, folks told me to sell, marry again, move on, pray harder, work more. Every word sounded like they wanted proof grief could be made tidy. She turned then. Caleb held his hat in both hands, the wind moving through his dark hair. So I don't think you foolish for keeping what hurts. I understand it. That was worse than judgment. Understanding reached where judgment could not. Clara opened her hand. The ring lay against her palm, dull in the barn light. It is not even mine in a true way. Might be not. I should have sold it the first day. Might be, but I couldn't. He nodded. She laughed once, brokenly. You see? Foolish. No, he said. Human. The word entered her like warmth. The trouble with healing was that it made old wounds ache louder before they closed. By midwinter, Holland pressed harder. His cattle cut fences near Caleb's Creek. His men rode past at dusk. The bank sent a notice that the rust note would come due before spring. Dobbins refused more credit. Marshal Crowder arrested one of Caleb's hands for drunkenness, though the man had been sober and cutting wood with Toby until sundown. Caleb responded by growing colder. He spoke less, slept less, checked the rifle more often. Once Clara found him in the barn at midnight, saddling his horse with his wound not fully healed. Where are you going? She asked. To end a conversation with Harlan, with whoever keeps starting it. She stepped into the lantern light. That sounds less like conversation and more like widow-making. His face hardened. Stay in the house. Stay in the house. No, and your fight. You say that whenever it is already mine. He pulled the cinch tight. The horse shifted. You think words will fix men like Harlan? You think standing in church and speaking gentle truth will stop a rifle? This land is all I have left. No, Clara said. It is not. He froze. The words had come before caution, but she did not regret them. Toby is in that house. Your wife's memory is in that house. Your own life is still in your body, though you treat it like a debt you are tired of carrying. His eyes flashed. You don't know what I carry. I know you are trying to make your grief useful by turning it into a weapon. The silence afterward was so sharp the horse still. Caleb stepped close. Careful. She lifted her chin though her heart pounded. No, I have been careful all my life. Careful not to want too much. Careful not to speak when insulted. Careful not to believe kindness. It did not save me. So tonight I will be plain. If you ride out angry, you might not come back. And if you do not come back, that boy will lose another home. And I will know I watched you choose pride over love. His face changed at the last word. Love had not been meant as confession. Or perhaps it had, in some hidden part of her heart that had outrun her tongue. Caleb looked away first. I don't know how to be needed, he said hoarsely. Not anymore. Clara's anger softened. You are doing it every day. I fail every day. So does everyone with a pulse. He gave a rough breath that might have become a laugh in another life. You make mercy sound like work. It is work and love. She looked at him then. Truly looked at the man who had insulted her, defended her, frightened her, fed her, listened to her, and stood beside her in a town that had measured her worth in gossip. That is work too. He did not ride out that night, but Harlan did not stop. The public choice came on Sunday. Clara had not meant to attend church. She owned one decent dress, brown wool with cuffs she had turned twice to hide wear. But Mrs. Bell sent word asking her to help with a child's cough after service, and Toby begged to go because the Christmas barrel had candy sticks. Caleb stood by the door in his black coat, still pale but straight. Well, go together. You hate church. I hate what people do with it. That ain't the building's fault. The Pine Hollow Church was small, whitewashed, and full of eyes. Clara felt every one as she entered. Some slid to her hem as if expecting another secret to fall out. Some moved from her to Caleb and back again. Mrs. Harlan sat in the front pew in blue velvet. Wade Harlan sat beside her, broad, red-bearded, and smiling like a man who owned the sermon before it was preached. Marshall Crowder stood near the back wall. The hymn began. Caleb did not sing. Toby did, badly and with confidence. Clara's throat tightened. The preacher, Reverend Pike, gave a sermon on truth. At first, it was ordinary enough. Then his gaze found Clara. There are those who come among a community under uncertain circumstances, he said, bearing symbols of vows not sanctified, accepting shelter from grieving households, stirring conflict where peace might be purchased. Caleb's hand closed into a fist on his knee. Clara sat very still. The preacher continued, voice swelling. There are men who refuse wise counsel out of pride, clinging to land that might better serve the common good. And there are women who must ask whether a ring hidden is a promise or deceit. The room turned. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. The ring, the town knew, or thought it knew. Someone had seen, someone had told. Her hand moved to her pocket, where the gold circle now rested wrapped in cloth. Caleb started to rise. She touched his arm. Wait. He looked at her, furious on her behalf, but Clara stood first. Every pew creaked with the shifting of bodies. Her knees trembled. She hated that they trembled. But she stood anyway, and perhaps courage was not the absence of trembling, but the refusal to sit down because of it. Reverend, she said, I answer what has been spoken of me. The preacher blinked. This is not a court. No, Clara said. In court, a person hears the charge plainly. A murmur moved through the church. Wade Harlan leaned back, smiling. Let the lady speak. We are all curious. Clara turned toward him. Curiosity is not the same as justice, Mr. Harlan. His smile thinned. She took the ring from her pocket. The gold shone small and bright in the gray church light. This ring was sent to me by Silas Boone, along with letters promising marriage. When I arrived, he was gone. I kept the ring because I was ashamed to admit the only promise I had was false. I did not use it to deceive Mr. Russ. I did not ask for his house. I did not take wages I did not earn. I cooked, sewed, tended a wound, taught a child letters, and stood where help was needed. Mrs. Harlan whispered loudly. A touching account? Clara turned. Yes, ma'am. Pain often is touching when it belongs to someone else. A few women lowered their eyes. Clara's hand shook, but she lifted the ring higher. If this town believes a woman worthless because a man failed to meet her, then this town has mistaken abandonment for guilt. I will not carry his shame as mine another day. She walked to the Christmas charity barrel near the stove and placed the ring on top of the folded blankets. A gasp went through the church. Sell it, she said to Reverend Pike. Buy flour for those who need it. Let something false finally feed somebody true. For a moment there was no sound. Then Wade Harlan stood. Pretty speech, he said. Now perhaps Russ can make one explaining why he owes the bank money he cannot pay. Why he refused a fair offer for land he cannot manage, and why a woman of uncertain reputation appears so eager to keep him from selling. Caleb rose slowly. Clara feared he would strike the man. In truth, some hard part of her wanted him to. But Caleb did not move toward Harlan. He stepped into the aisle beside Clara. My debt is mine, Caleb said. My land is mine, my grief is mine, and Miss Whitcomb's reputation is not a saddle for you to drag through mud because I once sell you water. Harlan's face reddened. Careful, Russ. I was. For 2 years I was careful, quiet, alone. You mistook that for wheat. Marshall Crowder pushed from the wall. That sounds like a threat. No, Caleb said. It is a boundary. Doc Bell stood then, surprising everyone. I treated Mr. Rusk after men fired on him near Northridge. Bullet wound, not imagination. Dobbins cleared his throat. Harlan's boys bought cartridges that morning. Mrs. Pritchard rose next, laundry plain and nervous. I heard Mr. Harlan tell the marshal that if Rusk lost enough sleep, he might sign anything. Crowder's toothpick fell from his mouth. The room changed, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. Lies that had sat comfortably in pews began looking for exits. Harlan pointed at Caleb. You can't prove Creek rights, a small voice spoke from behind Clara. I can. Toby stood on the pew, face pale but determined. In his hands was an old tin box Clara had helped him pull from beneath the loose floorboard in the pantry the day before, thinking it held his aunt's sewing things. He had not opened it then. Now he clutched it like treasure. Caleb stared. Toby! The boy swallowed. Aunt Ruth said Mr. Russ's wife put important papers under the pantry when the bankman came once. I forgot till Miss Clara taught me to write pantry first spelling. He handed the box to Caleb. Inside were land papers, an old survey map, and a deed signed by Caleb's father and witnessed 20 years before. The creek line was marked clearly through Russ's land. There was also a bank draft, yellowed but valid-looking, tucked beneath the deed. Caleb's face went white. Doc Bell took the draft, squinted, and let out a low whistle. This is from Eleanor Rusk's father, my wife's father, Caleb said. Looks like money placed in trust for repairs and livestock. Enough to cover your note if the bank honors it. Island lunged a step forward. That paper is old. S.O. is greed, Mrs. Pritchard muttered, and half the church heard. Caleb looked at the tin box as if it had risen from a grave. Clara saw what the money meant, and more than money. His wife had tried to protect him. Even in death, there had been a hand held out from the dark. His composure broke, not loudly. His eyes closed and his shoulders bowed under a weight that had shifted at last. Clara stood beside him but did not touch him. Not in front of everyone. Not unless he asked. He did. His hand found hers, rough and warm, and held it. That was the public choice. Not a kiss. Not a speech, just Caleb Rusk, proud, wounded, and grieving, taking the hand of the woman they had mocked and letting the whole town see whose side he stood on. By spring tall, Pine Hollow had learned to speak more carefully. Wade Harlan did not vanish like villains in penny stories. He fought the deed, threatened suit, and accused half the town of conspiracy. But the circuit judge confirmed the Creek rights in February. The bank honored Eleanor's draft in March. And Marshall Crowder resigned before anyone could ask too loudly why he had spent so many Sundays at Harlan's table. Harlan's men stopped riding past Rusk Creek. The ranch did not become rich overnight. Hidden fortunes in real life often paid debts rather than buying mansions. Caleb repaired the east shed, bought 2 milk cows, replaced the roof over the pantry, and hired back the hand who had been falsely arrested. Clara took in sewing from 3 towns and kept a small notebook of every coin earned. Though Caleb told her she need not account for thread in a house she had saved more than once, she did not answer him the first time he said that. She was afraid of words like home when spoken too soon. The apology came on a mild April morning, when the cottonwoods showed silver buds and Toby tracked mud through the kitchen, after promising on his honor not to. Clara was kneading bread when Caleb entered, carrying a small wooden box. "Gio, something," he said. "If it is another injured animal, the answer is no until after breakfast. Eat and breathing. That is a comfort." He set the box on the table. Inside lay the gold ring. Clara froze. "I bought it back from Reverend Pike," Caleb said. "The church had not sold it yet." He said the charity barrel. Money came from elsewhere after folks got ashamed of themselves. Her hands were flower white. "Why? I owed it an apology. A ring." She looked down. Caleb removed his hat. He did that now when words mattered. "The day we met, I called you a woman who got off the wrong train. I was hurting and scared and mean with it. That explains it, but don't excuse it. You were never lost because Boone failed to stand where he promised. You were never unwanted because fools said so. You came when I needed help, and I was too proud to receive it kindly." Clara's throat tightened. "I was angry for a long time. I know, sometimes I still am. You got it right." The kitchen smelled of yeast, coffee, and spring mud. Toby laughed outside, chasing a chicken he had named General Washington. Life went on around the tender places, not waiting for them to heal, but giving them reasons to. Caleb picked up the ring. "This don't belong to Boone. Not anymore. It don't belong to Shame either. But I won't ask with another man's promise." He closed her fingers over it. "I want you to keep it until you know what you want done with it. Sell it, melt it, throw it in the creek, hang it on a nail. It's yours to decide." That undid her more than a proposal would have. All her life, decisions had been made around her, over her, for her own good, for someone else's convenience, for lack of money, beauty, or place. Caleb did not ask to own her future. He handed it back. She covered his flour-dusted hand with hers. "What if I want time? I can wait. You are not known for patience. I am improving under strict supervision." She laughed then, and the sound surprised them both. The proposal came later, because Goodlove had learned not to hurry in that house. It came after Caleb brought the old bed from the closed room into the sunlight, sanded it, and asked Clara whether blue curtains still suited or whether yellow would make the room warmer. It came after Toby began calling her Miss Clara in front of company and Clara at home by accident. It came after Mrs. Pritchard apologized with a basket of clean linens, and Mrs. Harlan looked away in the mercantile rather than meet Clara's eyes. It came on the first evening, warm enough to sit outside after supper. The creek ran full with snowmelt, bright beneath the lowering sun. The repaired shed stood square and new-smelling. Toby was asleep inside after a day of declaring himself too old for naps and proving otherwise before dusk. Caleb and Clara sat on the porch steps with a blanket around their shoulders. His arm brushed hers, not by accident, but gently enough that she could move away if she wished. She did not. "I went to town today," he said. "I know, you forgot coffee." I remembered coffee. Then, the world has changed. He drew a small ring from his coat pocket. Not moon. This one was plain silver, made by the blacksmith from a melted watch chain. Caleb's wife had once given him permission to sell if hard times came. Clara knew, because he told her everything now, even the things that hurt. Eleanor's mother gave her that chain. Caleb said, I asked myself whether using it was wrong. Then I thought of how Eleanor used to scold me for letting good things sit useless out of sorrow. Clara touched the ring, but did not take it. I loved her, Caleb said. I need you to know that cleanly. I do. I will likely grieve her in some measure all my life, I know. But grief is not the same as refusing to live. You taught me that, not with speeches, with bread and bandages, and telling me when I was acting like an old fence post. She smiled through sudden tears. He turned the ring in his fingers. Clara Whitcomb, I am not asking because I rescued you. Truth is, I was the one bleeding in the street. I am asking because you stood when standing cost you. Because you made this house hear laughter again. Because Toby looks for you before he looks for me, which wounds my pride but improves his judgment. Because I love you, and I would be honored if you chose this ranch, this boy, and this imperfect man as your family. Clara looked out over the creek. The girl who had boarded a train with 3 coins and a false promise seemed far away, yet close enough to touch. She thought of the platform, the mud on her skirt, the marshal's questions, the laughter. She thought of a ring sewn into a hem, because shame needed somewhere to hide. She thought of blood beneath her hands and Caleb's eyes see not a stray, not a burden, but help. You are certain, she whispered. No, he said. She looked at him. He smiled a little, nervous and honest. I am afraid. I'm afraid I will fail you. I am afraid love can be taken fast. I am afraid I will say the wrong thing on day's pain gets the better of me. But I am certain I would rather be afraid with you than safe alone. That was the answer her heart trusted. She held out her hand. Yes, she said, but I will not be chosen out of pity, no, or gratitude, no, or loneliness. He slid the silver ring onto her finger. Out of love, then. Hard-earned and supervised, she laughed while crying, and he kissed her hand first, as if asking even then, even after, yes, whether tenderness was welcome. The wedding was held in June beneath the cottonwoods, beside the creek. No one could steal now. Doc Bell stood with his wife. Mrs. Pritchard cried into the linens she had hemmed herself. Dobbins brought sugar candy for Toby, who wore a coat too large and a serious expression, until Caleb told him he was the best man and should try looking less like a judge. Reverend Pike apologized before the ceremony, not in grand words but plain ones. Miss Whitcomb, he said, I mistook gossip for concern. I ask your forgiveness. Clara considered him. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not pretending harm had been small. It was refusing to let harm choose the rest of her life. I forgive you, she said, and I hope next time a woman arrives alone, Pine Hollow offers bread before judgment. The Reverend bowed his head. Amen to that. Before the vows, Clara held Boone's gold ring one last time. She had not sold it, melted it, or thrown it in the creek. She had asked Caleb to nail it above the inside of the pantry door where the hidden papers had been found, not as a shrine to shame, but as a reminder. False promises could be changed by true choices. What once marked abandon now watched over flour, coffee, school slates, and Toby's stolen cookies. When Clara walked toward Caleb, the whole ranch seemed to breathe with her. Her dress was not silk. It was soft cream cotton, stitched by her own hands with tiny blue flowers at the cuffs. Caleb stood waiting in a dark coat, his face solemn, until she reached him. Then the solemnity broke, and the smile that came through was young, in a way grief had nearly stolen forever. Toby stood between them for the first part, because he insisted family should not start behind anybody. When Reverend Pike asked who gave the bride, Toby lifted his chin. She gives herself, he said, exactly as Clara had taught him. Laughter moved gently through the gathering. Clara gave herself. Not because she had nowhere else to go, not because a letter had summoned her, not because hunger, shame, or winter had pushed her into the nearest shelter. She gave herself because love had proven patient in a kitchen, brave in a church, steady beside a sickbed, and humble enough to apologize. Caleb's vows were short. "I will not always be easy," he said. A few ranch hands chuckled. He ignored them. His eyes stayed on Clara. "But I will be honest. I will make room for your voice in this house. I will protect you when danger comes, and listen, when pride is the danger. I will love you in work clothes, in Sunday clothes, in sorrow, in laughter, and in all the ordinary days that make a life." Clara's vows were no longer than his. "I will not be silent to keep peace with cruelty. I will not mistake your fear for lack of love. I will stand beside you, not behind you, and help make this home a place where no child, no tired soul, and no wounded heart has to earn a chair at the table." Caleb swallowed hard. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sure, with Toby making a disgusted sound that turned into a cheer when Mrs. Bell handed him cake. That evening, after the guests had gone, and the summer dark softened the creek, Clara stood in the kitchen of the Rusk house, her house now, and listened to Caleb and Toby arguing on the porch about whether chickens possessed military discipline. She touched the silver ring on her finger. Above the pantry door, the old gold ring caught the lamplight. She did not hate it anymore. It had traveled with her through insult, loneliness, hunger, blood, fire, and snow. It had stayed hidden when she had no strength to explain herself. It had fed the poor when she was ready to let shame become mercy. It had returned to her not as a claim, but as a choice. Caleb came in quietly and stood beside her. "You all right?" he asked. Clara leaned her shoulder against his arm. "I was thinking how strange it is. I came west because a man said he needed me." Caleb looked at the ring above the door, then at her. "He was wrong about most things." "Yes," she said, smiling. "But not that." From the porch, Toby shouted, "Clara, Caleb says chickens don't salute." "They do not," Caleb called back. "They might for me," Toby insisted. Clara laughed and opened the door to the warm evening. The ranch lay under stars, no longer a place holding its breath. The creek moved steady in the dark. The repaired barn smelled of hay. Bread cooled on the table. A boy waited on the porch. A man who had once thought himself too wounded to be needed took her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Clara Whitcomb Russ, once a lost mail-order bride, with a hidden ring and nowhere to stand, stepped into the lamplight of the home that had chosen her back.